Hello everybody out there in Bourbon Real Talk land. Randy Sullivan coming to you today with a short educational piece about a category of whiskey called light whiskey. Now basically what happened is in the 60s and 70s, vodka started kind of making its appearance heavily in the US market, and US consumers were just enamored with it. And people were buying tons of vodka and bourbon sales were going down. And the bourbon producers started getting the impression that the problem was that bourbon's flavor was too bold. And an easy way to reduce your flavor is to distill to a higher proof. But if you've watched any of my other videos about the legal definition of bourbon, you're not allowed to distill bourbon above 160 proof. And if you distill grain spirit above 190 proof, it gets into the grain neutral spirit category, which is effectively what vodka is. And so distilleries started playing around with distillation proofs between 170 and 190. And they started calling this light whiskey, and they created a new category for the distillers called light whiskey. And so the legal definition of light whiskey is it has to be made after January 26th, 1968, because that's when they got the law passed to create this new category. It has to be distilled above 160 but below 190. It can be stored in a new charred oak container or an uncharred container, but it does have to be a new container. It can be a mixture of the same type, and it can contain up to 20% straight whiskey, which is a little bit counterintuitive, because if you're trying to make a lighter whiskey that doesn't have a lot of flavor, you know, why would you blend in a straight whiskey that obviously has that flavor that they're trying to get away from? But they made a rule that you couldn't put more than 20% straight whiskey in there. But if you do put straight whiskey in it, then it has to be called a blended light whiskey. It's no longer just the light whiskey category, it's the blended light whiskey category. And one of the interesting things about light whiskey is that in the last few years, there hasn't been a lot of demand for it, but some of the large producers were still producing pretty large quantities of it. And so I've seen a handful of bottlings of light whiskey that came from MGP that had really high age statements on them, like 13, 14 years. And I've tasted a few of these, and they're actually pretty tasty. You know, there's some research out there that shows that the maturation process, that whiskey aging in the barrel, is where the whiskey gets up to 70% of its flavor. So kind of an interesting concept to get a light whiskey that doesn't have a lot of grain complexity to it, but it's picked up all of those barrel flavors over time. So if you get a chance to try a light whiskey, I'd check it out and see what you think for yourself. I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk.